Let's bring in our panel now. Joining me now from Sana'a is pro-Houthi journalist Hussein El-Bukhaiti. In Chamonix, France is Elizabeth Kendall. She's a senior research fellow in Oriental Studies at Oxford University and has been involved in educational projects in Yemen. And Fatima Abul Asrar is a senior analyst for the Arabia Foundation, a pro-Saudi think tank based in Washington, D.C. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Elizabeth Kendall, let me start with you. More than 4 years on, how have the Houthis managed to survive and become a de facto state in much of Yemen?
They have managed to become a de facto state, although I would argue that it's not one that functions very well. Of course, the Houthis came to power in 2014 originally on an anti-corruption ticket, and that message resonated much more broadly than their usual base. So they were able to get greater support than anyone expected in Sana'a and then eventually in surrounding areas. But one must remember that their military capability came largely from the Yemeni military itself. About 2/3 of the Yemeni military and personnel went over to the Houthis with the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh.
Right.
But I would argue that there's another way of asking that question, which would be, why have the Saudis failed over the last 4 years, given their superior military capability? And I think that has to come down partly to incompetence. After about 20,000 airstrikes, probably around a third of them have hit civilian targets. And they are the Yemeni military cobbled together from a whole host of different factions, tribes, groups. So it really has been very difficult for them to hold up against these seasoned warriors, the Houthis.
So let me ask you, Fatima, without infusing a moral judgment on this, in terms of military capability, it's David versus Goliath, right? Yet Goliath, with all this military firepower, has failed, as we heard from Elizabeth. Why?
You know, for all of their power, the Saudis are a mismatch in this war with the Houthis. The Houthis use asymmetrical warfare against a conventional army. That is not something that is bound to succeed. The Houthis have been particularly good at this since 2004. So it has been 6 rounds of war with the Yemeni government, and with it, the Houthis they were able to largely survive. And then at the same time, what we see at the moment is that they're surviving because it is a low-cost war for them, and survival is really the core of what they need to do. They're particularly good at this, and I think an army, a big army, I mean, no matter how big it is, won't be able to squash a rebellion as such. I mean, we're seeing it in Syria with Bashar al-Assad, for example.
Okay, but help me understand, Fatima. Sorry to interrupt you. Help me understand. When you say asymmetrical warfare, what do you mean exactly? Give me an example of a tactic that the Houthis use that makes it difficult for the Saudi-led coalition.
I mean, the Houthis maintain their strength from being in heavily populated areas that you cannot really do any type of carpet bombings there. The Saudis are definitely at a mismatch because what they're doing is they're relying on an aerial strategy that have absolutely failed. Not here. And, not going to say that this is, it's failing. And I think, we fail to understand what the Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is not really there to fight or eliminate the Houthis, or even as they state that they want to upend the Houthis' rule. What they're doing is primarily protecting their borders from the Houthis. So they're going after large targets. And the Houthis survive because they want to, through prolonging this war, frankly. So I think, both have different objectives. The Saudis want to, currently the majority of their operations are around the Sada, the Sada border with Saudi Arabia, where they're trying to implement a buffer zone at that time. And what they want to do is really strike at the large ballistic missile capabilities of the Houthis. So that is, for the Saudis, the primary objective. And everything else comes secondary. And the Houthis, particularly survive because they're deeply entrenched in heavily populated areas that cannot be extracted from.
Okay, I want to follow up with that, but I want to go to Hussein. Hussein, I'll come back to you, Fatima. Hussein, let me ask you, is that at the heart of it all? For the Houthis, they just need to survive for it to be considered winning, whereas the Saudis want absolute victory, and therefore, until they have that, they're always going to have failed.
No, I don't think that the Houthi, as you said, they just for them to survive to win. And we've seen that the Houthi have conducted many attacks on the Saudi border, and they tried to gain many territory in south of Saudi Arabia. And I think it's all because that the Saudi-led coalition has actually got it wrong, because they have exaggerated, if we can say lied about the strength of the Houthi by saying that is fully supported from Iran. And after the blockade, we've seen that the Houthi actually mainly depend on the weapons they have from the Yemeni army. The Houthi now, and I believe that in this year, they still have many weapons and many targets in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. And the Saudi till now, they have used all their power. They haven't got anything new. And the more Saudi airstrike and destruction of civilian target like schools and any other area, this actually get more support to the Houthi movement, because there is this kind of hatred in Yemen against Saudi Arabia in general and against the Gulf country, and as well against the United States and Britain, and especially their stand toward the occupation of Palestine. And for the Houthi to fight all these groups and those countries defending Yemen, I think this is one of the good examples that Yemeni actually try to follow.
Okay, and Hussein, let me then ask you, we know that the Saudi airstrikes have been responsible for the deaths of thousands of people. This has been well documented. On the other hand, we just had news coming in recently, the World Food Programme, saying that the Houthis are denying them access to grain storage at Hudaydah, and therefore they can't distribute this to the people. And we also have had credible reports from Human Rights Watch, for example, in the past, showing that the Houthis are not afraid to also play very ugly in this war. They torture people. They beat people up. They do all sorts of people disappear under their watch, right? At what point do the Houthis just become, or have they always been, just a massive group of thugs who want to stay in control for as long as possible?
If we see that the Houthi are in control of about 70% of the population of Yemen, is most of the population in Houthis area. And if they were, as some people might call them, thugs or militia, I don't think they can actually continue to rule Yemen despite all this war against them.
Certainly,
and
but
the blockade and the constant
guns, right?
attack from Saudi.
They haven't put down their weapons. They're holding
sorry?
guns. I mean, we haven't asked those 70% of the population how they feel about it. We don't have a poll of it, right?
Of course, I mean, if you see in Yemen, I mean, everyone is holding a gun. But who is the Houthi fighting? If the Houthi were not fighting Saudi Arabia, which is backed from the United States, if the fight maybe was only a civil war, as some people might describe, maybe we will see a different picture. And about the World Food Program, there was an agreement between both sides that they will withdraw from the road, so those workers can reach this so-called Red Sea mills. But as soon as the Houthi opened the road, the Saudi-backed forces fire has targeted, and snipers has killed one of the Houthi fighter in that area. That's why all this agreement has collapsed. And of course, you might see some wrong things that has been done by the Houthi here or there.
Right.
But I mean, this can happen. But if you compare it with Aden and the security situation in Aden, the Houthi are much better than what's happening in Aden, and this gives them more support.
So Fatima, comparatively, the Houthis cannot compare to the alleged war crimes committed by the coalition. Respond to that.
It's a different ballgame here, and you know, the Houthis have committed egregious violations on the ground. The only thing is that they're not highlighted because they're seen as really primarily local. I think a few weeks ago you interviewed a colleague of mine who was talking about the Hajur and the tribes of Hajur in Hajjah, the northern areas, where the Houthis brutally squash them for merely, wanting to violate their lands and for those tribes wanting to defend themselves. We have seen, the atrocities in Hajur have been largely unsupported. There has been shelling, there has been a ballistic missile sent towards them, 3,000 people were displaced, and all of that doesn't even make the news. You can't tell me that it doesn't compare when, at the beginning of the war in 2015, the Houthi and Saleh army desecrated the south of Yemen in Aden and in Abyan and other areas. Thousands of lives, over 4,000 deaths in less than 6 months of guerrilla warfare and fighting. You know, thousands of people are dying, and it's not a joke. So if we're going to talk about this as a statistic of who's doing what bad, the Saudis are not doing good either. You know, we're not. I think you made a mistake there by identifying me as a pro-Saudi think tank. We have a Saudi founder, but we have to understand.
No,
we're not here to say that
you do have your funding comes from private Saudi funders, and I have yet to ever come across your organization openly criticize Saudi Arabia on any issue, from Khashoggi to anything else. So we have to be accurate as well for the viewer to place things in the right context.
No, wait.
Right?
You can be. I am sorry. I disagree with you there. You know, as a person who works in this foundation,
Certainly.
I have criticized the murder of Khashoggi.
Okay.
I have criticized, you know, the treatment of the women activists.
Okay.
I have been very vocal and open about that, and have criticized the Saudi mistakes in Yemen. So I really, truly don't appreciate the way that this has been framed.
Okay.
And our founder
so for
has
example, if we
the
have,
right to express his views, and our funding is diversified.
Okay, so
I
certainly,
needed
if we
to
have,
correct that first.
For example, if we have the Heritage Foundation, we say right-wing think tank. If we have Think Progress or something like that, we'll say left-wing think tank. Because of the Saudi funding and because of your founder and your founder's positions, we made an editorial decision to say pro-Saudi. Although it is encouraging to hear that you criticize Saudi Arabia, and we appreciate that. And none of this is going to be edited as well. So, Fatima, please, this is all, all on the table, and we appreciate it. Elizabeth, let me bring you in here. Now, you've heard the differing perspectives as to who's more to blame here. And where we are right now in 2019, the place is an absolute mess. It's a humanitarian catastrophe. In Stockholm, there seemed to be a semblance of optimism moving forward, but that hasn't translated on the ground. Why?
Well, Imran, first of all, I think you've done a very good job of bringing out the fact that there are no obvious good guys in this war. On the one hand, the Saudi bombardment has generated a lot of criticism, especially when it's poorly targeted. And on the other hand, the Houthis have not been brilliant at governing and have also clamped down very heavily on any dissent. If only Stockholm could work. Why is it not working? Well, there were three main elements to it. There was the Hodeidah ceasefire, there was the Ta'iz understanding, and there was the prisoner swap. None of them have come to pass yet. And that's largely because the detail in that Stockholm agreement that was now signed almost 4 months ago was so thin. It was lacking in any of the specifics, and so it's very difficult to interpret on the ground. Both sides, for example, wish to consider the local forces, who were supposed to take over Hodeidah, to be their own forces. And as for the Ta'iz understanding, in fact, fighting has escalated again there. We're no closer to peace, and the prisoners have not yet been swapped. I think what's happened is that after 4 years of war, both sides are incredibly polarized. The views are entrenched, and it's really hard for them to foresee a future where they might have a power-sharing government. And so we have to hope that the United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen, Martin Griffiths, does keep persisting with his tireless and laudable efforts to bring these two sides to some kind of tangible acceptance of the Stockholm Agreement so that it can be rolled out properly on the ground.
Fatima, would the Saudi-led coalition and the Hadi government ever accept the Houthis governing along with them?
I think Elizabeth had just right now highlighted that the Houthis haven't particularly been good at governing. This is not their forte. They're good fighters, we'll give them that. But in terms of governing, they are not even able to allow the aid agencies deliver food supplies to a majority of the population. 60% of the aid, according to the World Food Programme, has been diverted to Houthi militia as opposed to people who need it. So, they have a mission that is not necessarily governing the country of Yemen.
Right.
It's empowering, Iran and Iranian strategy in the country. And we continue to be completely, just undermining that and not wanting to talk about it. So this has been very evident in the way that they're actually, I mean, all of the militia that they're using, it's expendable army, as long as they can maintain that power. And as long as they can maintain and prolong the war, as long as they can prolong the humanitarian crisis and, you know, cry about the blockade and the humanitarian suffering, the more that they gain a seat at the table.
Okay.
And the more that they are able to be, you know, able to get the advantages that they got at Stockholm.
Okay.
And that's something that we continue being blindsided about.
Okay, so Hussein, just because the north of Yemen has a history of being largely inhabited by Zaydi Shias, it doesn't give the Houthis a God-given right to control the place. And as we heard from Fatima, they failed miserably as they've been governing. So stick to fighting. You shouldn't be involved in governing as Houthis. That's the word from Fatima. What do you think, Hussein?
I mean, I can say that the Houthi, the government is not functioning so well, and they are not maybe brilliant in like governing Yemen. This is not because they are bad. It's because of the blockade. Because 85% of Yemen income is in the hand of the Saudi-backed forces, is oil and gas, which is in Marib. A full blockade that have destroyed all airports and ports. So there is little. Little money for Yemeni government in Sana'a to fulfill everything in need for Yemeni civilians. But we have to say
for fighting, obviously.
that of course no one have the right. No one have the right to rule Yemen. As well, no one have the right to come and to attack a country, to form a blockade, to kill and injure hundreds of thousands of Yemeni civilians, to destroy a country. I mean, let's see, is the Houthi now, have they become weaker because of the war? No, they become more stronger because of this coalition, because of the killing of Yemeni civilians. And I want just to add one more thing about when Fatima have said about Hajur and that the Houthi has used ballistic missile. This is the type of lies that we only saw on Al Arabiya TV and Saudi TV. There was an agreement between Hajur and Houthi in 2013 so that the war will not reach that area and to leave the road safe. So what happened 3 months ago, Saudi loyalists in that area, Yemenis, have cut the road, have killed and kidnapped dozens of people, and the Saudi-backed forces has came with their fighter jet supporting those people. So those people were actually working with the Saudi. That's why the Houthi has to take a strong step to stop that, because this will cause
you're not disputing that it happened. You're just
Yemeni against Saudi Arabia.
You're not disputing that it happened. You're just justifying it. I mean, okay, listen, we don't have time, and I'd love to continue.
No, it didn't happen. I said about the ballistic missile.
Okay.
She said ballistic is a big lie, but of course.
But then you still followed up with context as to why they would attack. Okay. Nevertheless, I'm out of time, Hussein. But listen, Hussein, Elizabeth, and Fatima, I'd love to have you all back on the program. It's a disgrace that we're still talking about this war raging 4 years on. And above all else, it's a humanitarian catastrophe, and we hope that it ends soon. I thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers, Hussein, Elizabeth, and Fatima.